A dramatic new report is emerging from Lusaka. Brian Mundubile and his running mate, Makebi Zulu, could be approaching a defining moment in the extraordinary political and security crisis that has followed Zambia's general election. A report published today claims that efforts involving the United Nations to resolve the standoff have failed to produce an alternative arrangement, and that Mundubile and Makebi could now be handed over to Zambian law enforcement authorities. But there is an important warning before we go any further. Some of the most explosive details in this report are attributed to unnamed sources close to the alleged negotiations. Disclaimer: the content in this video is based on publicly available reports, statements, and allegations. These claims remain unverified, and we do not endorse or confirm their accuracy. This video is intended for informational and discussion purposes only. At the time of this narration, we have not independently established an official United Nations announcement confirming all of those details. So we are going to separate what is being reported from what has been independently established. And there are some very serious questions. According to the report, Mundubile and Makebi sought refuge at United Nations premises following the deadly security operation in Lusaka, in which former Transport and Communications Minister Mtatwe Kafwaya was killed. That operation has become one of the most controversial events of Zambia's post-election period. The authorities have presented it as a national security operation. Mundubile and his allies have fiercely disputed the government's account, and have portrayed what happened as an attack against them. Now the situation appears to have moved into another phase. The new report claims that a representative connected to United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres traveled to Lusaka as part of efforts to resolve the standoff. It further claims that discussions took place involving President Hakainde Hichilema's government and the Mundubile side. And this is where the story becomes explosive. According to the report, attempts to find an alternative solution failed. It claims that President Hichilema insisted that Mundubile and Makebi must face Zambia's legal process over the serious allegations being investigated. The report goes even further. It alleges that proposals involving a third party or possible safe passage out of Zambia did not succeed. Again, these particular details require independent confirmation. But if they are subsequently confirmed, they would tell us something extremely important. This would no longer simply be a dispute between the opposition and Zambia police. It would have developed into a sensitive diplomatic problem involving Zambia's government, its leading opposition figures, and the United Nations. The report also says church representatives became involved in efforts to break the impasse. And, according to the same account, church representatives could witness any eventual transfer of Mundubile and Makebi from UN protection to law enforcement authorities. If that happens, the next few hours could be critical. Because what exactly happens when Mundubile and Makebi leave the UN premises? Are they going voluntarily for questioning? Will they immediately be arrested? What charges, if any, will be formally brought against them? Where will they be taken? Will their lawyers accompany them? And will independent observers be allowed to monitor what happens? These questions matter enormously. Inspector General of Police Raphael Musamba has already issued call-outs for Brian Mundubile and Makebi Zulu as authorities investigate alleged threats to national security. And several individuals associated with the opposition have already been charged with treason. Those allegations are extremely serious. But charges and allegations are not convictions. Every accused person remains entitled to due process and the protections provided by Zambian law. And that brings us to another crucial part of this story. The United Nations is already watching Zambia. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Türk, has publicly expressed concern over reports of arrests and detentions of opposition members surrounding the August 13 election. His message to Zambia was significant. Whatever the gravity of the allegations, arrests and court proceedings must comply with Zambian law and international human rights standards. Detainees must know why they have been arrested. They must have access to lawyers. They must be able to communicate with their families. And they must be brought before the appropriate judicial authorities. That means if Mundubile and Makebi are eventually transferred into police custody, the international spotlight will almost certainly remain on what happens next. And there is another extraordinary claim in the report. It alleges that more than 300 members of the opposition alliance have been detained or arrested without being charged or appearing before court. We have not independently verified that figure. If authorities dispute it, they should provide the accurate number and legal status of those detained. If opposition representatives stand by the figure, they should also provide documentation identifying the cases they are referring to, because numbers of this magnitude should not simply circulate without verification. Now consider the political implications. Brian Mundubile was the principal challenger to President Hakainde Hichilema in the election. He has rejected aspects of the electoral outcome and announced his intention to challenge the result through the courts. At the same time, people associated with his political camp are facing extremely serious national security allegations. So Zambia now has several processes unfolding simultaneously: an electoral dispute, a criminal investigation, a human rights controversy, and potentially a diplomatic standoff involving the United Nations. Those processes must not be confused with each other. Challenging an election result is a legal and constitutional matter. Allegations of treason or insurrection are criminal matters requiring evidence, and concerns over arrests and treatment of detainees are rule of law and human rights matters. Each must be handled according to the law. But there is one question hanging over everything tonight. What happens when Brian Mundubile and Makebi Zulu walk out of those UN premises? If the reported arrangement exists, Zambia police will face intense scrutiny. Mundubile and Makebi will also face questions they cannot avoid. And the government will have to demonstrate that whatever happens next is based on evidence and law, rather than political retaliation. The opposition, meanwhile, will have to answer the serious allegations being investigated, rather than relying solely on claims of political persecution. And the United Nations will need to clarify exactly what role, if any, it has played in resolving this extraordinary standoff. This story is moving quickly. For now, the headline is not that Mundubile and Makebi have already been convicted of anything. They have not. And it is not yet that the United Nations has publicly confirmed every detail contained in this report. The real headline is this: the standoff may be approaching its most consequential moment yet. If Mundubile and Makebi are transferred to Zambian authorities, all eyes will be on what happens next. Will they be arrested? Will they be charged? Will they appear before court? And will the government provide the evidence behind these extraordinarily serious allegations? This is a developing story. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because if that reported handover takes place, we will examine what happens next, what charges are brought, and what evidence emerges. And now I want your view. Should Mundubile and Makebi voluntarily submit themselves to the legal process? Or, given the concerns already raised by the United Nations Human Rights Chief, is their fear of detention justified?